Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views of myself, Salino Manquidir. The time is 23 minutes past 9, and we're going to be switching gears to, I think, what has been the headline in the last 24 hours. More than 20 Palestinians were killed and scores wounded after coming under fire near an aid distribution site in Rafah, Gaza. A stark reminder of the deadly conditions civilians face daily amid a genocide that continues to devastate the enclave. While the Israeli military claims warning shots were fired at suspects, the reality on the ground tells a far harrowing story of desperation, a story of starvation, and a story of chaos. And at the center of this growing humanitarian catastrophe is that controversial Israeli-backed aid distribution system, increasingly, being criticized as being as much about military control as it is about relief. And aid agencies across the world, including the UN, have boycotted the operation, accusing Israel of weaponizing food access in its campaign against Hamas, or its so-called campaign against Hamas. And joining us now to unpack these recent developments is Professor Halper. He's the director of the Israeli Committee Against House Demolitions, and a long-standing critic of Israeli occupation policies. Is coming to us live from Al-Quds. Professor Halper, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure chatting to us, and really, really appreciate you giving us your time.
Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, I think I'm not sure what to even ask you, anymore when things like this happen, because it seems almost every week, every second week, there's scenes of devastation, there's scenes of horror that I don't think we've ever seen ever in the 21st century. But with this one specifically, what's your initial reaction, to that incident in Rafah? What do you make of it? What does it tell us about the broader picture of this genocide and the direction that it's taking?
Well, genocide is what it is, and it's an important word. But more and more, what I'm seeing, I'm just the word in my mind with all my analysis and everything I know, is simply mass murder. That's all. I mean, that's all that's really happening in Gaza is mass murder. In other words, the army itself said, and it said this for more than a year, there is no more military objective. We've defeated Hamas. You're always going to get Hamas fighters here and there, or people that belong to Hamas. They had 20 to 30,000 fighters. They're embedded in the population. You're not going to get, Hamas is also a political movement and a political party and a religious movement. So you're not going to get everyone that was ever identified with Hamas killed, unless you get deep into the population itself. So there is no more military objective. And there's no political objective. Israel could have gotten the hostages back long ago if it had simply adhered to the plan that it agreed to. The United States would have really dealt with Gaza itself and even wanted to make it into American real estate. So Israel really has no political objectives. Its political objectives are more in the West Bank. In terms of normalizing with Saudi Arabia and the Arab world and keeping this conflict or this genocide or this mass murder going on in Gaza is counterproductive to that. So it all boils down to Netanyahu's coalition government. If not only did Smotrich and Ben Gvir, these two right-wing, but it's not only them. This is also important. It isn't only these two right-wing guys and their parties. They've really taken over the government. The Likud is today a party of Smotrich. Netanyahu himself has moved to the right even more and become a kind of a Smotrich himself. So that in effect, what you're having is the takeover of the government by this extreme religious settler forces, so that not only would the government fall if there was a ceasefire, but the government will fall even if there's a demand, and that's what Woodcoff is working on now, to get some of the hostages back, a partial. Even that, the right wing says, if any hostages come back, we'll leave the government. I mean, so that the mass murder is simply going on for coalition politics, for Netanyahu's own personal gain, and what really strikes you is the impunity. I mean, people are being murdered for no political or military reason, simply because they're political pawns. And then you've got all these mechanisms like this U.S. Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's a part of an enforced starvation regime that Israel has put on. And simply the open killing of people, mass killing, dozens and dozens have been killed in the last few days, again, with not even a bother of justification, not even trying to, it's become simply acceptable to murder Palestinians in mass numbers, and the international community really says nothing about it.
I want to touch on, the broader implications here. We've heard about, that latest truce proposal led by the United States of America. What do you make of it, especially given Trump's administration's almost hardline stance and dismissal of Hamas and some of their requirements on that truce proposal? What does this signify? Because to me, it almost feels like we are moving further and further away from any kind of meaningful ceasefire.
Well, that's right, because Israel doesn't want a ceasefire. Again, it's even counterproductive for Israel because it's interfering with this normalization process that would really help it in the long term. But again, you've got simply these coalition politics. You don't have to go very deep to explain it. That's sort of where we are. The U.S., I don't know if the U.S. has a policy, but the U.S. always supports Israel. And so on the one hand, you could say the same thing for the U.S., that supporting what Israel's doing in Gaza is also interfering with the normalization process. Trump was in Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago. You want that so how is this helping that? It's not clear. On the other hand, of course, they've always, I really can't explain the logic, but Witkoff messed up everything. Because there was, if we remember, a three-part agreement about releasing hostages. The Israeli army would retreat out of Gaza, and you would get an end to the war, basically, an end of not only a ceasefire but a permanent ceasefire. There was stage 1, 2, 3. They finished 1. Trump's elected. Witkoff becomes this mediator. You can move to 2 now, which is the main phase, where all the hostages basically come back. And all of a sudden, Netanyahu, because Netanyahu doesn't want to go to the second phase, because that would mean the end of the war and his government would fall. So he's the one that says to Witkoff, well, let's put in another thing. They have to release 10 or 11 hostages, and we're not going to end the war. He stuck this other thing in the middle between phase A and phase B, and Witkoff bought it. So instead of Witkoff saying, no, there's a signed agreement, you signed it too, Israel, let's move from A to B, and all the hostages would be back by now. Everything would be over. Witkoff played that role of basically being Netanyahu's agent. And since it was completely unacceptable to Hamas, because Hamas's interest is ending the war and reconstructing Gaza, of course, for the sake of its own people, so that if you go back to the original agreement that was agreed upon, the war ends. Israel won't accept that, and Israel accepts the United States accepts the Israeli position. So it makes no sense politically, except and this Witkoff could have been the guy that would be tough on Netanyahu. Everybody's saying Trump doesn't like Netanyahu. There's a gap between them. Netanyahu's lost all his influence, but you don't see it on the ground. Witkoff, and Witkoff said Hamas is right. Israel violated the agreement. Hamas has said we'll agree to this Witkoff plan, and release a few hostages if there's an American guarantee that the ceasefire will hold, and that Israel can't break it like it's always done before. That's completely rational and reasonable. And it's the United States, again, that's supporting this unreasonable Israeli position. So Hamas is right, and the United States is playing this weird game, again, that's counterproductive, I think, even to its own interests.
In another,
rationality, you're not going to find it.
Yeah, true. Prof, in another, big and very, very concerning development just a week ago, Israel has just approved its largest West Bank settlement expansion, I think, in over 30 years. How significant is this move in terms of the regional geopolitics and just the future of the two-state solution, which is increasingly becoming obsolete?
It's not becoming increasingly obsolete. There is no two-state solution. And there never was a two-state solution. I mean, Israel never intended, or if we go back to Oslo, in the Oslo agreements, a two-state solution was never even mentioned. They were negotiating over nothing really in Oslo, but Israel has never intended. And don't forget, in the 7 years of Oslo during the 1990s, Israel doubled its settler population. So there was no hint or indication that Israel ever considered really a two-state solution. Now it doesn't have to pretend anymore. Netanyahu has said there'll be no two-state solution. And now again, I'm going back to this normalization because we're missing this piece, this bigger picture. The way Israel wins, the way settler colonialism wins, is by normalizing its settlements, normalizing its control, and creating an apartheid regime, literally apartheid, just like in South Africa for the Palestinians, because it's the only way Israel can take all the land, turn the whole country into Israel, but it's stuck with 7 million Palestinians that it can't give citizenship to. So it's the same dynamic in a way as South Africa, and then you normalize, and it's a fairly clear plan, it's a fairly clear path. And Israel's doing it. And so it's ethnic cleansing the West Bank. It's Gazifying the refugee camps. You have military attacks on all the pockets of resistance to the north of the West Bank. Settlers and the army are clearing the land in the West Bank. Now 22 new settlements have been declared. Israel's not even pretending anymore about not only about two states, but about some kind of a peace process. Normalization is not negotiations. Palestinians are not a part of it. It's simply an agreement between the United States, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and the Arab governments to normalize, including the settlements. So what Israel's doing basically in these couple months before normalization is completed and Saudi Arabia signs this agreement is it's clearing the land. It's creating the facts on the ground that it wants. And that will be the basis then of normalization. So whatever Israel can do now in terms of cleansing the West Bank and creating new settlements and Judaizing the West Bank more and more and more until the day that Saudi Arabia signs the Abraham Accords and it's completed, that all becomes normalized. So we're in the final stages of Israel taking over Palestine, Judaizing Palestine, and locking the Palestinians into a Bantustan.
All right. I think we're going to leave on that note, Prof. Thank you so much for chatting to us. Always a pleasure to be getting those very insightful insights, and hope to see you again in the so distant future.
All right. Thanks for having me on. Bye.
There you go, Professor Jeff Halper coming to us live from ICAHD. Yeah, very, very concerning stuff. I think, as he mentioned, the two-state solution and its pretense, I think it's clear to see that it's finally gone. That idea is no longer there, and the pretense thereof is no longer there. The scenes are there for everyone to see. What's happening in the West Bank and the complete annexation thereof is also sending a clear message. But really concerning scenes and really concerning state of affairs in Gaza. We're going to see a quick break. News and views continues after this.